Now that we're done with explaining what an ecosystem is, we will look at the communities within ecosystems in lesson 3.1. The most important idea here is to understand that organisms are limited by limiting factors and they are shaped by the limiting factors. Let us recall what a community is. Community is a group of populations interacting with each other, while an ecosystem is the community interacting with the abiotic factors. A few examples of communities you might know: desert community, such as the community we live in, polar community, urban community, another example of the community we live in, and rural community. What is a limiting factor? As we said, a limiting factor affects an organism. Mainly it affects their numbers, their ability to reproduce, or their ability to distribute over said land. We can see a few examples here, such as climate, soil chemistry, and available space. Now let's take an example of a limiting factor, the temperature here. And to look at limiting factor, we must consider the range of tolerance. A range of tolerance can be broken down to how much can this organism take before it gives up. And it has an upper and lower limit, which are the minimum or maximum conditions an organism can survive, such as the steelhead trout here. Its limiting factor is temperature. Below 9 Celsius and the steelhead trout cannot survive, it will directly die. Between 9 and 13 Celsius, the steelhead trout, while it will struggle and be pressured and under stress, it will be capable of surviving to a certain amount. In its optimum zone, it will flourish, while also once again in the upper limit, just like in the lower limit, while it may be able to survive, it will not be doing so well and it will be stressed. Now on to ecological succession. That's the other half of the lesson. There are two kinds of ecological succession, primary and secondary. Ecological succession is what happens when we replace a community with another, or replace with a lack of community with another, resulting in the change of limiting factors in the form of abiotic or biotic limiting factors. Let's start with primary succession. Primary succession is when you have no topsoil. So you have no present community. When you have no topsoil, primary succession happens, where it starts out with lichens, which colonize the bare rock. And then as they colonize the bare rock, they release acids, which release the nutrients within the rock, and they feed off that. And after they die, their corpses make parts of the soil, and they do attract insects and such, which also helps their corpses to make parts of the soil. And lichens, a fun fact is that lichens are not one organism, but a combination of both fungi and algae. And the more of them they die, the more soil is created because their dead bodies are decomposed by either fungi or eaten by insects. While in secondary succession, in contrast to primary succession, topsoil is present. Therefore, the pioneer species, rather than being lichens in primary succession, the very first species there, we will have plants, either plants that previously survived or plants that are first capable of colonizing the area after whatever disturbance caused the secondary succession. Now, to the pioneer species. As we already explained, in primary succession, we have lichens, which is a combination of fungi and algae, which grow on rock. Then they release acids on the rock. Then their dead bodies create the topsoil, or the dead bodies of insects brought by them create the dead soil. And because they are the very first species to appear, they are considered the pioneer species. In secondary succession, though, the pioneer species would be plants, because plants will be the first thing that will appear, or the things that will survive whatever disturbance caused, and they will start secondary succession. Now, intermediate stages are very similar. Rather than having basic plants such as very short grass or very small annual plants, we're going to start seeing seeds brought in by animals, water, or the wind. And then in the case of primary succession, it will grow on the newly formed soil. In the case of secondary succession, it will grow on the empty soil. And then after the intermediate stage is completed, which has the shade intolerant trees, we will go on to the mature community stage, which is the final stage, also known as climax community, where there is, in the case of lichens, it develops from bare rock all the way until a stable community, or from secondary succession from plants all the way until a mature community. As we already know, it started out with small annual plants, herbs, grasses, then developed into grasses, shrubs, and shade-intolerant trees. And then finally, we have shade-tolerant trees and very massive trees here, and the ecosystem experiences very little change. The number of species will really change, the kind of species, the distribution, all of that, and that is what makes it a climax community. The main thing about a climax community here is its stability. Climax community over a long period of time, unless it disturbed and forced into secondary succession, will stay the same. Here we have a visual example. We know that primary succession starts with no topsoil, bare rock, lichens form, then small annual plants come after the soil made by the lichens, and then as more soil is formed by the dead plants or lichens, perennial herbs and grasses are formed, and then we're done with the pioneer stage. In the intermediate stage, we'll have grasses, shrubs, and shade-intolerant trees. And then as we reach the final stage, mature community will develop shade-tolerant trees. The secondary stage is very much the same as the primary stage, where we will have annual plants, grasses, herbs, and then the pioneer stage ends, shrubs, shade-intolerant trees, and then the intermediate stage begins to change to the mature stage. We will get shade-tolerant trees. The shade-intolerant trees will die as the shade-tolerant trees outgrow them. And we finally have the mature community, which is filled with shade-tolerant trees. Now, the only main difference you will notice here is this one. Starts with an extra part in its primary stage, which is the bare rock and lichens, while this one has a disturbance and then directly goes towards the animal plants, unlike the primary succession. And that is all.
That'll be it for lesson 3.1, communities, biomes, and ecosystems. If you have any questions or want to ask anything at all, you can ask it down below in the comment section or in the server. If you want more videos like these, you can find them in the YouTube channel. And that's it. Enjoy them.